next guest is the New York Times and Sunday Times bestselling author, BAFTA nominated screenwriter, and the only British writer to have worked on a Star Trek television series. His new book, Outlaw, is a blockbuster. James Swallow, welcome to Thriller Talk.
Well, it's great to be here, guys. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, man. So many interesting things to dive into with you, but I want to start here. So I know you were a journalist first, right? So when did you decide that you really wanted to be an author? And what made you decide that the time was right to finally sit down and crank out your first manuscript?
That's a great question. It wasn't a question of jumping; it was a question of being pushed. Because I was at that stage in my career where I kind of realized that as much fun as being a journalist was, I felt like the work was a little disposable. You know, you'd write a great article, you'd spend months, weeks, maybe putting together something, and it came out in a magazine. A month later, people would forget about it. And I kept thinking, I want to do something with a bit more permanence to it. I'd like to see a book on a shelf with my name written down the spine. I'd like to see something that would have, like, it would live a little longer than just maybe like a month before it became, wrapping for fish, right? So I kept thinking, how am I going to do this? When am I going to make this step? What's the right situation? And I was turning this idea over in my mind. And then in the course of like about a 3 to 4 month period, 4 magazines I was working for all went to the wall. And suddenly it was like, oh, okay, now you don't have a choice. Now you have to find another revenue stream.
Mhm.
So it was, I think mentally I was in the right place, but that gave me kind of a shove in the back.
Yeah.
And so I went off, and the first thing I did was I did a series of young adult kind of steampunk westerns for a publisher here in the UK, and that was my very first paid prose fiction.
Wow, that's incredible and pretty fantastic that you kind of dove in with great writing skills and transitioned. Did you find it difficult, because I came from medical writing, to go from nonfiction to fiction because it's very different style?
Yeah, I mean, I was used to writing about. I was an entertainment journalist, so I was used to writing about stories,
Hmm.
but not actually writing the story, right? So I had a sense of what narrative and story was, and I'd written short fiction and stuff, and dabbled in it here and there when I was younger. So I think I had the sort of like the basic inkling, but the discipline, certainly, the kind of the writing toolkit that I took with me from journalism. Be on time every time, always hit your deadline, always write good clean copy. Try and make your work as frictionless as possible. All of those skills have definitely served me very well as a prose writer.
Mhm. Yeah, well said. It's good discipline, right to deadline and right to word count. So that's fantastic. So Mark Dane stands out to me as a particularly compelling protagonist. I really love the fact that, his background's MI6, and I wondered what kind of research you did into that shadowy world, and how does this research play out in Outlaw?
Well, I just tried to sort of steep myself in as much of that world as possible. Just I read widely, and I tried to research and speak to people who had been involved in the sort of the fringes of that sort of organization to get a sense of what it's like to be part of the real thing. And then I kind of put my finger on the fast forward button and said, okay, well, what I'm going to write is not it's not going to be realistic version of what MI6 is like. It's going to be this heightened reality action version of it. So it's the real world through that sort of thriller action lens, right? And I love doing the research as well, because you never know what you're going to find, right? You go in there and you say, oh, I want to research this thing about banana plantations. I'm going to do that, right? And in the middle of a thing about banana plantations, you find out about gun running and helicopters or whatever, right? It's just like it takes you off on a complete tangent, and then you end up uncovering something that's really cool. Go, oh, I got to use that in a story. So I love the treasure hunt of searching for information, and a lot of that as it kind of expressed itself through the Mark Dane novels. The series, I didn't really set out to write a serial narrative, to write a kind of overarching story, but after the first couple of books, it kind of came to me and said, like, this is the way these stories are going to go, and you can either push against it or you can go with the flow. So I ended up creating 6 novels which have kind of dovetail with each other. So although they're all standalone stories, you can read them in isolation. I wanted to create something where if a reader picked up the very first novel, Nomad, and followed with me all the way through to Outlaw, that dedication would be rewarded, is I would pay off all of the kind of stuff that I've laid in through the books. And that's what's happening in Outlaw, is I'm pulling all of this research I was doing, a lot of stuff about the way that financial systems work, because the main threat in the story is about an attack on the US financial network. So I was reading about how sort of currency stimulation works, and how, you know, hardened computer systems are used to sort of be protected against electromagnetic pulses. All of these things, all kind of coming from different directions, and that helped me kind of create the sort of threat matrix for this story. And it's combining that with the plot threads from the earlier books that the story kind of took shape.
Amazing. Love that.
So I'm a fan of that series, but I'm also a really big Star Trek fan. So I want to ask you about a couple of the Star Trek books, especially, by the way, the new Picard book, the Devil's Veil. I got that one, and I read it, loved it, had to know. So are you a big Star Trek fan? And if so, which show or movie is your favorite? And what are you hoping for in season 2 of Picard?
Well, you know, I don't think you can write for an intellectual property if you're not a fan of it. I think that would show, right? Because people who read these books based on whatever show or franchise you're talking about, they're fans. They want to see more of those characters and more of that world. And they want to hear stuff that feels true to those voices of those characters and the voice of that world. So you have to know it. You have to be a fan of it. I've been a fan of the Star Trek series since I was a kid back in the 80s. I used to come home from school and it would be on BBC Two here, and I would watch it before we sat down to have dinner at home. So I've always had a lot of love for the Trek universe, and having the opportunity to write stories in that franchise, in a way, I feel like I'm kind of giving back to something that's given me so much enjoyment over the years. Is being able to kind of add a little bit to the tapestry of it. You know, if you think of Star Trek as like a giant crazy quilt of, you know, patchwork quilt that everybody's putting their little bits on, I get to go, oh, I made that little corner right down there, you know, and so that's really fun to do that. And writing for the story for the Picard show, that was very interesting, because normally when you write based on an IP, you tend to be kind of at a remove, like at arm's length from the creators. They're like, you know, we do our thing and you do your thing, and our thing is the real thing and your thing is just something that kind of, it's off there on its own. But with these books, we had a very, very close relationship with the team at CBS. We got to have the kind of door swung both ways for a change, which was very, very, very unusual. I've never had that experience before. And it was really fun to feel like, you know, the work kind of had a seat at the table, is that we were all helping to support the whole franchise as it exists, rather than being something that's just kind of a frivolous thing to one side. As to the future of the show, I'm just happy to see where they take it. I have no idea where things are going. I don't have any kind of special insight or anything like that. Sometimes they'll send us, when we're working on the books, we get to see advanced materials or scripts. But I haven't seen anything like that for like over a year. So your guess is as good as mine about where the show is going to go in the second season.
Well, season 1 is fantastic, so I'm really excited for season 2 personally.
So I really love the fact, as we've touched on, James, that you have such diversity in your portfolio. You write everything like TV and science fiction and thrillers. And so what is the one common element in your mind for all writing projects? And how do you adapt to these different genres? Because it must be a transition of sorts.
Yeah. It's all writing at the end of the day, right? I mean, it's all like words on a page. I mean, it's like characters and story and narrative. Those things, no, it doesn't matter where you're writing them. You're still writing about characters you want people to be compelled and interested in. That never changes. But it's the tool set that you bring to it. You know, I talked earlier on about like my journalistic tool set, is I think that metaphorically, if I imagine my writer toolbox, you know, with my screwdriver, my socket wrench, and all that kind of stuff, is that, you know, this is the tool you use when you're writing for, say, a video game. This is the tool you use when you're doing a short story or prose or whatever. And I think having that breadth of knowledge, that being able to work in those different genres and those different mediums, I think it makes me a better writer, because it stretches me in directions I'm not expecting. And what I find is I fold the experiences back in from one genre to another. So to give you an example, a lot of the work I've done working on video games has been about developing a narrative that a gamer will want to be carried on through the story, so you have a propulsive, forward-moving narrative. That translates very well into writing thrillers, because thrillers are about a pacey, propulsive narrative. So I know absolutely skills I learned there, I've transferred over to the other ones, and I think it's it keeps me sharp. I think it's I think if I did the same thing, if I was just writing, say, short fiction, if that was all I ever did, I think I would get stale. I think having the opportunity to sort of like swap over from one to another keeps me fresh, keeps me interested, and you know, and keeps just pushing me forward to do new stuff and in new environments.
Yeah, I love what you said too, because I did my master's in writing popular fiction, and we had to critique other genres because there was romance writers, science fiction writers, fantasy writers, you know, horror writers, a wide variety. And what I found was I learned, like, for example, about world building from science fiction. And I learned about, you know, relationships with romance. And I think bringing that into, like you said, all your different writing projects, it can't help but benefit from that variety.
Absolutely. You know, I love having the opportunity to go to different worlds, to tell stories in different environments, because I think it's just, you know, it's writing. I love my job, as you can tell how enthusiastic I am about it, right? And I love having the opportunity to tell stories in different places, because I think it's just, why limit yourself, right? You know, there's so many great ways to tell story. I mean, I've never done. Let me see. What haven't I done? I mean, I haven't written a stage play, or a song, or like an opera, or something like that. You know, yeah,
Yeah.
I'd give that a go. If someone said to me, you know, do you want to write a stage play? Or do you want to write for a theater? I'd be like, yeah, why not? You know, what are the limitations of that? Is how can I put my skills into that environment? I'd be fascinated to know how you translate, you know, from one thing into another. I think it's a great challenge.
I'm going to ask you about some of that stuff in just a little bit here, actually. But before that, since you love telling stories, can you tell us the story of when how you got the opportunity to write for Star Trek, the television series? I did read, as the intro, in the intro I said, you know, I read that you're the only British writer to have ever worked on one. Is that true? But also, how did that opportunity come to be, and what went through your mind when you landed that gig?
Well, that's my, you know, I always say that's my badge of geek pride, right? Is that just by sheer happenstance or luck, you know, I happen to be currently. I mean, it may change in the future, but I certainly, I think I'm the only one right now, but definitely I was the first. And it just came from, it grew out of my career as an entertainment journalist, because I was working for a magazine that covered the Star Trek shows. And a lot of the people working on that magazine were fans of the series. And what would happen is a lot of us would say, well, we're going to do an interview with this actor, or we're going to do this bit of coverage about the show. But because I wanted to be a writer, I was fascinated by the production, by the kind of behind the scenes stuff. So I would always say, well, if someone wants to interview the writer, could that be me? Can I talk to that script writer? Can I talk to that producer, that director? Because I wanted to see, you know, I'm the kid peeking behind the curtain. I'm the one who wants to know how the magic trick works, right? So I would do these interviews with, you know, these script writers, and I would be asking them about their episode, and then I would sneak a question in about how to write. So I'd say, well, you know, this character does this. That's very interesting. And what would you do if you had a problem in Act 3? You know, and just sort of, I was very subtly getting a private education from these guys. And after a while, they're kind of like, you know, do you actually want to be a writer? And I'm like, yeah, I do. And they pretty much kind of held the door open and looked the other way, and let me sneak in the back and pitch a few story ideas. And if you've never done pitching, let me tell you, it's hellish. It's, you know, that show The Voice, where they get people to stand up and sing, and they, you know, they throw you out if your voice isn't good. It's the writerly equivalent of that, where, you know, you come and you say, I've got this great idea, and here's my idea, and you put all of your energy into it, and they go, no, that's terrible, off you go, next. You know, and it's really soul destroying. So it taught me a lot of lessons. And so I pitched a whole bunch of ideas. I think over the course of maybe 4 or 5 years of pitching, I think I must have pitched maybe 300-400 story ideas.
Wow.
I sold 2 of them, which gives you an idea of how hard it is, you know. So I won the geeky lottery, basically. It was, you know, and I sold my first story. it was just basically a kind of like a one-page premise, which they bought, and then they passed it on to another writer who did the full version of the script. Because obviously I was at the start of my career, I had no credits. They weren't going to give me a script assignment straight off the bat. And then once I'd done that, I was even more driven, if anything, because I wanted to do it a second time to prove I wasn't a tourist, that I'd just been lucky. You know, I didn't want to be the one-hit wonder. I was like, no, I'm going to do this again to prove that I'm a proper writer. And so I sold like, I think about two seasons later, I sold a second premise. And off the back of that, that enabled me to kind of push myself forward as a professional writer. So when I went back to working in tie-in fiction, there's a Star Trek tie-in line. And I said, well, I've done this work for the show. Would you be interested in looking at a book from me? And so that's how I got into writing Star Trek fiction. I've always found that every project I've worked on, I try to look through it to the next thing and say, well, okay, I'm doing this job now, but what can this be a stepping stone to? Where can this take my career? Where can I evolve myself? If I'm doing this, can it lead to this next thing? So I'm always kind of constantly looking and building, and you know, because I think if you don't do that, you may find yourself being pushed where the wind blows you, and you end up in a kind of like, you know, in the doldrums, as it were. Whereas if you're looking at the direction your career can take you in, and being in control of it, you can get where you want to go.
I love it. Not only do you have a creative mind, you have a very good business mind. So
I think it's more. I think I'd say it's more kind of mercenary. The business, you know, more of a kind of you know, thinking like, how can this work for me? You know, so it helps to be a little kind of hard-headed about it, I think, at times.
Well, I respect what you've accomplished and your you know, vision to the future, to what you would like to do. I'm quite fascinated because I don't know a lot about the world of video games. So can you tell us what the key elements are when you write a video game? Is it mostly dialogue? And what is that world like? Is there a demand now for writers in that field?
It's one of those kind of how long is a piece of string questions. You know, people say, what is game writing? And I'm like, how long have you got? Because it can be, you know, you see a game, you'll see a scene in the game where characters are talking and it looks like a scene from a movie or a TV show. And that's presented like a script, pretty much the way that any other script would be presented. But then you talked about world building, you know, there's massive amounts of world building that have to be done for video games. There's a whole kind of invisible writing that is given to, you know, you write reams of material about backstory and characters, which will go to character designers or level designers, which the players will never ever see, but has to be written to kind of create the sense of that world. You have to write, if somebody picks up a book in the game and reads a page of the book, someone's got to write that. If somebody picks up an item and there's 2 lines of description, somebody's got to write that. You're walking down the street and a guy walks past you in the game and says, hey, how's it going? Someone's got to write that. Every little piece of dialogue has to be written, has to be wholly created. And it all has to inform the sense of that world. It has to be what we call environmental narrative. Because if you're in a fictional world, you want that world to live and breathe around the player. You want it to feel true and real. So all of it has to be moving in the same direction. And if it's a huge game, something like the Skyrim game is a really good example, where it's like, you know, 170,000 pages of stuff, you know, the kind of the equivalent to like 4 seasons of Game of Thrones worth of script in there, you know, so that that whole living, breathing world feels true. And I love doing game stuff too, because it's such a unique way to tell story. It's like nothing else on the world. You know, it's a bit like film, it's a bit like prose, it's a bit like theater, but it's not like any of those things, because you have this one unique thing, which is the ability to deliver story in a completely different way. You know, if you're watching a movie and you're a passive viewer of that film, it's like narrative is kind of handed to you, parceled out. You know, the film decides when you learn things. But if you're playing a game, you don't get it delivered, you discover it, and you choose the pace at which you understand that world. And writing that stuff, you know, putting those little breadcrumbs in and taking a player into a world and making it feel real is such a unique challenge. And it's just so much fun. And so some of these games are, you know, they're so huge, you can be working on them for years. I've worked on projects where there have been teams of like, you know, 10 to 20 writers involved in different things, from the smallest thing as like writing emails that you might find on someone's computer when you hack it, through to the big cutscenes with the climactic action moments. So it's not just one job. The even down to stuff as simple as we have a thing we call in games we call barks, where if you have a little minor character and a guy will say something like he's over there, or I'm reloading, or grenade, or something like that. Someone has to write that, and sometimes that has to be you, and it's like one of the most soul destroying jobs in video games. How can you say I'm on my way, yes sir, 20 or 30 different times, because the player's going to hear that over and over and over again. So there's so much stuff. It's such a broad panoply of types of writing, which again is one of the things that makes it really exciting to be part of, because it's like, it's never one job. It's so many different ones.
Well, I am a gamer, so you're making me feel guilty for all the times I skip the campaign and go straight to multiplayer, or skip the cutscenes and try to get past all that stuff. But I'm fascinated by that, and that's such another interesting topic. Out of all your projects, James, completed books, things that you've dabbled in, is there any one that stands out as being the most difficult for you to have completed, and why?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's like, they say about like kind of pain fades, blood washes off, scars heal, right? When you have that experience and then you get past it and it kind of fades away into the darkness. So it takes me a second to think about that. But I think if I had to pick one thing that was very challenging, it was my first Mark Dane novel, Nomad. Is getting that off the ground, because I'd had the idea for a few years that I would do something original that I would write in the sort of the action thriller space, because I've been doing a lot of tie-in stuff and I've been doing a lot of science fiction, and I wanted to do something different. I wanted to stretch myself, test my abilities, and see if I could tell a story in a different environment. And over a couple of years, putting this novel together, gradually I assembled something that I was happy with. And arrogantly, I thought, well, with my experience as having written lots of fiction, I'm sure, people will take me seriously and I'll be able to kind of jump to the top of the queue, and did I hell? That's not at all what happened. It was like starting again from scratch. And it was a very heartening, very sort of sobering experience to realize that the previous experience I had, while it was helpful, did not give me a boost in any way. And I still had to work just as hard as everybody else did. And that kind of cured me of my arrogance very, very quickly. But I spent like a whole year trying to sell this book in a time when people didn't want to read that kind of thriller, or at least that's what I was being told by publishers and agents. It was, the thriller's dead. Nobody reads airport novels anymore. It's either a kind of historical sort of, set it in the World War II or something like that, or in the 1950s. No one wants to read the modern espionage story. It's not popular. And I said, well, I do. I love those kind of books. There must be other people out there like me. But I spent, this sort of year in the wilderness trying to sell this book and not getting anywhere, even to the point where I can remember, months in, feeling quite depressed about it and thinking about all the work that I'd done and not getting anywhere. So that, for me, that was probably the toughest, to kind of just stick to it and just say to myself, this is going to stand or fall on the quality of the work, and you just have to dedicate yourself, just keep pushing. So that was the hardest challenge for me, definitely, I would say.
Well, I'm really glad you persevered, because I love that book. So well done. Really, really good. So you've had such an impressive career, as we've touched on several times today, with the BAFTA, the Amazon #1, Sunday Times bestseller, New York Times bestseller. In your career, what moment for you stands out as your proudest moment, if you look back on everything?
I think probably the first time I walked into a bookstore and saw a book with my name on it. And even now, that thrill never gets old, to just kind of point it and go, I made that. I told that story. I love the feeling of the fact that people I will never meet will pick up my book and for a little while be transported somewhere, that they'll get to have an adventure and, taken away from the workaday boring world. And I made that happen. And that's just so cool, is the idea that I can reach out to people all around the world who will maybe have a little bit of fun and excitement thanks to me, that I can kind of connect with them. I love that. I love the fact that us as writers, we get to do that with people.
Yeah, it fascinates me that, when when you see that book, James, and you think, if it wasn't for what was going on in here, that item would not exist. I love that. I think that's just brilliant.
Yeah, it's kind of like, we have, like, 26 letters and a bunch of, we have our laptop computers, and we just pound that keyboard for, like, 6 months at a time, and at the end of it, it goes from being a pile of paper, or some data on a thumb drive, to a physical object. Like, right here, here's Outlaw, my newest book, which I just got a couple of days ago, and I open up the box and I look at the book and I see my name in it, and I think, I made that. Good job. And I'm really, the thrill never goes away.
Great cover on that one, by the way. I really like the cover for that.
Yeah, it is really awesome.
It's a good one. You might have tipped your hand to already to my next question. Having already accomplished so much in so many different writing fields, is there anything that you haven't yet done that you'd like to? Maybe theater writing or something along those lines?
Um, there people often say to me, like, I've written in a lot of different franchises. Are there any franchises or IPs that I'd like to write for? And I say, yeah, absolutely. There's my favorite movies and stories. I'd love to tell a story, and God, I'd love to do a James Bond novel, just because it's such an iconic character. And to me, it would, I mean, I say, well, here I am, I'm saying it, and I'm thinking, what would I do? How would I do it? How daunting would it be to take on that character? But man, I'd love the challenge, just to see if I could do it. That would be great. But yeah, I think that's probably the biggest challenge. The thing that I think I would be the most excited about doing would be something like that.
Hmm. So, given your extensive writing experience, doing different genres and different types of work, what advice would you have for someone starting out in this career, a newer writer?
I always say that the advice I kind of give, that I boil down into the smallest kind of nugget of information, is 2 words: finish it.
Mhm.
Often when I talk to new writers, they'll say, like, "Oh, I had this really great idea, and I couldn't land the story, so I gave up, and I put that aside, and I started writing something else, and that really didn't work, and so I went on to something else." And so they have these, a suitcase full of half baked, unfinished ideas. And I always say, well, writing is as much craft as it is art. And if you think of yourself in the same terms as a plumber or a dentist or a baker, nobody wants somebody to half plumb their sink in. Nobody wants their cake half baked, right? Or their teeth half capped. You want to be a writer. You want to do this as a career. You got to close. You got to finish it. And even if you write the thing and you get to the end of the thing and you go, I don't like this, that's good, because it means you've improved as a writer, because your critical faculties are good enough that you can judge the quality of your own work. And if you want to be a professional writer, I think you need to have that ability to objectively look at myself and go, is this good? Am I doing my best work? Where do I need to improve? If you can't be objective about yourself, no one else is going to be. So you have to be honest with yourself. And I think if you can complete your work, if you can finish that thing, whatever that thing is, to use a gaming metaphor, you're leveling up, you're earning your experience points, right? And you're getting better as a writer. Whereas if you just never land your story, you're just going to be a dilettante. You're playing at it. So to have that dedication to get to the end, to cross the finish line, I think is one of the most important skills that a young writer can develop.
That's great advice. So, before we let you go today, can you just tell us what's next? What can we expect next from James? Well, after, of course, The Amazing Outlaw, which everyone should buy.
So Outlaw is my 6th Mark Twain novel. I'm going to flash the cover again just to make, because for the marketing people. There we go. And that is out today here in the UK. That is my 6th Mark Twain novel, and it is the conclusion of a lot of sort of story elements that I put in from the previous novels. And I'm going to let Mark have a rest for a little while, and I'm going to try something a little different. I am currently working on a new project which has not been officially announced, so I can't say much about it, but it is a new thriller. It's a standalone, and it's going to be something more in a kind of like crime thriller style rather than the sort of espionage spy place where I've been telling the Mark Twain stories. So that is really fun. It's a much more close focused story. Again, I'm pulling on skills that I haven't used for a while, which is challenging and daunting in of itself. So I'm really enjoying that. And past that point, what else have I got coming up? Let's see. I have done another action espionage explosive thriller though. I've been lucky enough to work on another franchise tie-in for it's part of the Tom Clancy universe. If you're probably familiar with the Jack Ryan Jr. series of Tom Clancy books, which sort of carried on after Tom's death. But there's also the kind of the wider world of the stories that spun off from the Tom Clancy video games. So we have Rainbow Six, Ghost Recon: The Division, and the one that I'm working on, which is Splinter Cell, which is a really great game series, and it's full of really sort of crunchy, high-tech action adventure stuff. Right there in that kind of that Clancy-esque sort of space. And I've written a novel called Firewall, and that's going to be coming out, I believe, April next year. So that was a lot of fun for me to write. Big fan of those games, been playing them for years, and it was great to kind of pick up a character that I really enjoy and get to write some dialogue for him. Beyond that, next year in the US in February, my fourth Mark Dane novel, Shadow, which is this one right here, that's going to be coming out in paperback. Beyond that, I have some ideas about where I want to take Mark in the future, but like I say, I'm going to rest him a little while and hopefully come back, with some all new challenges for him.
That's amazing. You are so disciplined, you can tell, because several novels in a row planned out and more to come. I want you to write a song too. Let's make that a challenge today.
I should do it. I love the fact that you think I'm disciplined. That's so sweet of you to say that, because I don't feel like I'm disciplined at all. I feel like, I wake up in the morning and go, I guess I should work now. And I feel like I'm wasting time. And I think, if only I was more focused, if only I was more productive, I could do more. And then other people look at me from the outside and go, you look so productive. I'm like, I'm really not. It's a crazy push-pull between wanting to do the work and then kind of going, maybe I'll sleep in this morning. You know how it goes.
Oh, we're all human. You just have to be kind to yourself, especially during these crazy COVID times. I mean, we're all living an altered reality, and hopefully we'll get back to some semblance of normalcy, right? So
that's the hope.
Perfect. Well, listen, thank you again for coming on. It's been such a pleasure to see you, to catch up, and to hear about your varied career. And we wish you every success. Do you want to hold up Outlaw one more time?
One more time.
It really is a great cover.
It is. I love it.
Yeah, me too.
Sure.
Very pleased with that. Thank you very much for having me on. It's been so great to be here. I love watching your channel as well, because you get to talk to so many interesting people, and it's such a great channel to watch. Even if you're just a reader or you're a wannabe writer, you can pick up so many great nuggets of information. I always think that there's no hesitation in my mind about kind of sitting down and listening to other people who work in my industry, because you can always learn something.
Well, thank you, man. We appreciate that for sure. And we'll be watching for all your thousands of projects coming out and hopefully get you back on maybe next year.
Cool. And I'm looking forward to seeing your book, Ryan, as well.
Thank you.
And Kim, I'm hoping to see more stuff from you soon too.
You bet.